Hey guys, this is Miss Latours, and we're over here at the Mount Juliet Library, and we're going to finish up our series on the American Revolution. If you remember, we started with the Declaration of Independence. We've done 3 parts to the American Revolution after that, and today we're going to finish it up with the personalities of the American Revolution. Now over there you see a great movie called The Patriot. It's a good movie, not for kids, great for moms and dads. It's a good movie because I like the way it shows the division among the American population right before the American Revolution begins. 1/3 of the population was Tories, still loyal to the Crown of England. 1/3 of the population were patriots. They wanted to break away and form a brand new country, and 1/3 of the population were apathetic. They could care less one way or the other, just so long as they still had a job and they were able to make money every single, make money, that's going to come back, and we're going to keep talking about that. The difference between winning and losing the American Revolution comes down to leadership. Inspired leadership on the part of the Americans, apathetic leadership on the part of the English. Thomas Gage is a perfect example of apathetic or downright poor leadership. He was the British commander of North America between 1763 and 1775. When asked how was he going to deal with the Americans, he simply said, "We will rely on nothing but force to procure even decent terms of peace." Basically, he never considered the Americans to be a serious opponent. For example, in the Battle of Bunker Hill, England took casualties of well over 1,000, whereas Americans took casualties in the neighborhood of about 370. Why? Because of his arrogance. He just kept sending troops to go up against the Americans, and these troops wound up being nothing more than cannon fodder, okay? Yeah, he eventually does win the Battle of Bunker Hill, but it's a perfect example of what we call a Pyrrhic victory. A Pyrrhic victory is, you get the W, but the cost of getting that W was so ridiculous that you really wound up losing. How bad was he? Even his wife, Margaret, was considered to be an American spy. American leadership, unlike the British leadership, tended to be inspirational. This can best be seen in the Christmas crossing of the Delaware River in 1776. Washington took aggressive and decisive action in crossing in the middle of a snowstorm. We know what that's like now over here in Tennessee, guys, okay? In the middle of a snowstorm, he crosses with 5,000 American troops, horses, artillery, 18 pieces of artillery, and in the whole process, not a single person, horse, or piece of artillery was lost. To inspire his troops, Washington had all of the commanders read the following from something that we call American Crisis. You may have heard about the author of American Crisis, a man named Thomas Paine. He was an inspirational writer who also wrote Common Sense. Let's listen to those words.
These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of men and women. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Remember, the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph.
So guys, here's the difference between these two leaders. On one hand, you've got Thomas Gage, who's just using his troops as fodder. He doesn't really care if these people live or die. And then on the other hand, you've got George Washington. George Washington inspires his men. That Battle of Trenton was so inspirational that it actually turned the tide of the war. It looked like England was going to score a first-round knockout punch on the American colonists, but as it turns out, because the battle went so effectively, it inspired more and more people to join the cause of the American Revolution. How apathetic were the English? The leader of the English army at that particular point in time, Charles Cornwallis, wasn't even there. He decided to take his family on a vacation, okay? My goodness. How arrogant was a guy like Charles Cornwallis? He was so arrogant that at the final Battle of Yorktown, he refuses to do the surrender himself. He sends a subordinate to actually do the surrendering. He just had no concept as to how brave the Americans really were. Okay, we've done the military leaders. Now let's do some of the political leaders. We're going to take a look at Sam Adams, John Hancock, Lord North, and King George III. You have to understand, I could have done another dozen or so, but we had to narrow it down as best as possible. Sam Adams, he was a rabble-rouser. He was the guy that would provide the emotional support to get the colonists ready to actually fight the American Revolution. He creates an organization called the Sons of Liberty. This picture over here shows you how the Sons of Liberty dealt with tax collectors as we were leading up to the American Revolution. What they would do with the tax collectors, meaning the Sons of Liberty, they would take them, tar and feather them, and in this particular case, they're pouring hot tea down the throat of the guy over there who was the tax collector. These guys did not play. They were serious about this. Here's another picture of some of the most famous Sons of Liberty. You've got people like Adams, Hancock, Patrick Henry, Paul Revere, Dr. Warren, and Benedict Arnold, who was at one time a patriot. Sam Adams often said, mankind is governed by their feelings, not by reason. And that's what Sam Adams did. He was able to channel the emotional support to get people to fight the American Revolution. But emotions alone are not always what you need. There are times when you need calmer heads, and above all, you're going to need financial support. This is where a guy like John Hancock comes in. Remember what I've told you a number of times. Denial of the profit motive was one of the key factors creating the American Revolution. Nowhere do we see this better than with John Hancock. John Hancock, like most of the businessmen of that particular era, was a smuggler, meaning that he refused to pay the taxes on England, not because of any particular reason like he felt it was immoral. He just felt it was a cheap way to be able to get his goods into the colonies without having to pay the high English taxes. Most of the merchants had an arrangement with the English officials. Here's the deal, guys. You look the other way while we send our goods in, and we're going to give you a certain amount of money in return. It's good for the English officials, and it's going to be good for the tradesmen. However, a new English official comes along and says, you know what? I don't like that deal. I want more money. Hancock decides he's going to try and run around this guy. The end result is they catch his ship called the Liberty. They confiscate not only the cargo, but the whole entire ship as well. Remember I told you, you need more than just emotional support. You need money. John Hancock is so ticked off at what the English did to them that he's going to take his considerable fortune and he's going to help finance the American Revolution. That means you took a guy like Hancock, who was pretty much a Tory, and you made him into a patriot that's going to be there signing the Declaration of Independence. There's his famous signature over there. He's putting his John Hancock on the Declaration of Independence. During the American Revolution, the Prime Minister of England was a man named Lord North. Now, Lord North never really understood what was happening in the colonies. Part of the reason is because of the distance and time to go back and forth. When he passed the Coercive Acts, he never realized that the Coercive Acts were going to motivate not just the people of Massachusetts who this act was directed against, but it's going to motivate all of the colonies, okay? Lord North made the mistake of thinking that he was dealing with Englishmen living in the colonies. And when he reads the resolutions of the First Continental Congress in 1775, that's when he suddenly realizes, hey, I'm not dealing with Englishmen living in the colonies. I'm living with a brand new thing called Americans. Had he realized that when the Coercive Acts were written in 1774, he would have reacted completely differently, because he read, by the time the resolutions get to England, he reads the resolutions of the Continental Congress in 1775. Unfortunately, the damage was already done. Take a look at this picture over there, guys, of the First Continental Congress. You've got all the heavy hitters over there. You've got Washington, Jefferson, John Hancock, Ben Franklin, both of the Adams. It's an all-star team of Americans. And people make the mistake of thinking that Lord North was an incompetent. He wasn't. His biggest problem was a combination of both time and distance, okay? And another misconception was that of King George III. They thought that King George III was mentally insane during the time period of the American Revolution. King George III does have a lot of mental instability all throughout his life, but throughout most of the American Revolution, he pretty much knew what was going on. So to blame him completely is not really a true thing to say. I guess the bottom line is the common error that was made by both Lord North and King George III is that they failed to realize that the colonies were no longer English. They were not English citizens living in the English Empire. They were Americans living in the 13 colonies. These Americans felt alienated from the English government. Lord North and King George III failed to compensate for the cultural diversity between England and the American colonies and the distance in time. That just worked against them. Their biggest mistake, folks, they misread the times, which leads to the writing of the Declaration of Independence. There it is, guys. I closed the circle. We started with the Declaration of Independence, and we're going to end with the Declaration of Independence. The American Revolution is now about to begin. As to who won the American Revolution, obviously we did. How we won the American Revolution? Well, that's a story for another day. Take care, guys.